couple comments on process to begin. Then Mark is gonna give a brief 10 to 15-minute presentation. I thought, okay, we have 4 sessions. We have an hour and a half tonight for introduction. We have 3 hours for general fund budgets, hour and a half for library, senior resource center, TIDS. And then on, I believe, October 22nd, we have 3 hours for a wrap-up. And I'd really like to keep those 3 hours entirely for wrap-up, so I'm hoping we can get through all the detailed budgets and questions before we get to the 22nd. I did send out an email, but just for the tape and the public, and for you newbies, what we do is we keep a list, and as we're discussing budgets, if something comes up and it seems just something you'd like to consider at the end, maybe when we're trying to get to our number, just say, I'd like to add this to the list. Anyone can add whatever they like, and then that's what we'll get back to on the 22nd. I'm gonna, Rebecca promised to help me try to keep track of time. If we're getting to a discussion and it seems like we're getting to the end, I will ask for everyone to just go around one time and make a final comment so we can move on, remembering that we will get a chance to discuss at the end like we always do. The public comment, if we have time, of course, I'd like to include public comment, but I'm a little concerned that we're gonna be, we're gonna run out of time. But we do have the public hearing on November 19th. That is really late in the process, however, so I'm thinking, of course, anyone in the public is encouraged to email us or speak to us about an issue. Email is better because then we all get it, but I will set aside some time on the 22nd just so we have public comment at a timely, in a timely manner, not after we've already made decisions. I'm going to announce a schedule at the beginning of the meeting, but please let me know if you feel like there's not enough time or we need more time, even as we're discussing. I think we can keep it flexible. I'm going to assume that everyone has read their budgets and done their homework, and we don't need staff to do a long-winded introduction or a lot of comments before we can just get right into our questions. I did want to ask first for questions when we're talking about a budget, so give everyone a chance if there's something they truly didn't understand or need for information. And then once we've done that, I'd like to just open the floor for discussion. I won't call on people. Let's just have a chance to talk. So that's what I'd like to do. And I'm assuming that we're all going to behave ourselves and be nice. Yeah.
Thank you. So in past, we went like page kind of by page, like when we do financials, and just said, do you have any questions about anything on here? We didn't do that in long-range financial plan, but I'm just wondering, is that something we're gonna do, or should we just try to get through all the questions?
Well, okay, that brings me up to good. What I was planning for tonight is I wanted to just talk process for a couple minutes. I wanted to give Mark 10, 15 minutes to do an introduction. I thought we could do a question period. And then, our challenge tonight is that we're still at very high level, and we're gonna have a chance to talk about detailed budgets. So I'd rather not get into detailed questions tonight, because we will talk about them either next week or the week after.
And by department meeting.
Yes.
So during that time.
Yes, so, but areas I thought that would be good to talk about tonight are revenues, and we have the cover memo some of which we already talked about. Service level discussions. Of course, we're talking about planning later in the meeting, so I guess we should put that aside, but we can talk about many of the public works, or any others that people have. And then there's a list on page 30 of large capital items that I thought would be another thing we could talk about tonight. And that would be useful use of our time. So I was hoping to get by 6:35 to the point where we could talk about those 3 more general areas and roughly 20 minutes each, and see how we do. So, okay. And are there any, comments or any consideration? Okay. All right. See, we're already ahead of time. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. I'm going to start just with the September 17th memo that accompanied the executive overview of the 2019 proposed budget that was out in the packet. And I want to start by emphasizing that this is a bit of an unusual budget cycle for staff and probably for the board, people who've been here as well. And we just want to express again, please understand that this budget is knowingly being put forward as a baseline for a starting point of additional discussions. is not your, not your recommended per se by staff. I mean, we realize there's a lot of dynamic issues that the board needs to engage discussion on and decisions need to be made. So this is before any contemplated adjustments to service levels, capital priorities, other revenue diversification or cost recovery changes that the village board may want to consider as part of this budget. I did again highlight in chart form some of the larger budget challenges. Right before we get to the options is the benchmark number of this budget as drafted would include a $730,421 tax levy increase or 6.4% tax levy increase. Now to that end, I gave everybody a score sheet. Play along as we go, either today or through other discussions. This particular sheet reflects all the various ideas on the second, third, and a little bit of the fourth page, the September 17th memo that staff has prepared in advance for the board to consider. The board may certainly have other issues that come to light, which again we will continue to add into our list. But we thought it might be helpful, given the fact that there's a lot of upfront items that you may want to keep a score sheet per se, some notes. So we did this. I can print extras out for you if you need it, just as an aid to help through these working discussions. I won't get into the specific suggestions. Again, presumption is that you've had an opportunity to review that and the materials that were presented. I did provide everybody else with another kind of a summary sheet here. This is my overview of the overview. It's really meant to illustrate two things. You know, there's some big ticket items in the budget here. There's 8 of them. I've listed in the right what we would normally expect to see year over year, and then what we've seen in addition to normal in 2019, which makes this year a little more challenging than most to get to a budget level that's comfortable for the board and the community. So again, we're talking about the North Shore Fire Department's a $2.27 million line item. Normally, we'd expect to see an increase about $50,000 a year in that budget cost for the village. This year, we saw an increase of $122,000. And a good portion of that is due to the fact that we're not programming rental revenues at this point into the budget. Something we can look at as we go before we get to the final budget. That's typically a cost offset. And right now, we're not clear if those revenues are gonna be available, so they were not included in the budget.
Is the fire range in there?
So,
Okay.
the health insurance is a $975,000 line item. For a reference discussion, staff would consider a normal annual increase of health insurance around 5%, quantified at $43,000. You know, we've done better than that over the last few years, but this year we're programming a base increased rate at 10%, which is $43,000 above and beyond what we normally expect. Plus, there's been the various enrollment changes. There's just been staff turnover last year that account for another 35% increase in health insurance costs for the village in this budget. Salaries and wages is a $4 million line item at what we call normal 2% COLA. That's $80,000 a year. We would expect those to increase. This year, again, due to staff turnover, that increase was only $30,000. So it's, comparatively speaking, about $50,000 less than we would normally have expected. Duncan fees, don't expect those to really go up or change much from year to year. However, Single night parking now is gonna be a general fund expenditure, so that represents a $48,000 increase to the general fund. Debt service is 1.8 million. We've had a target of limiting the increase for debt service tax levy to 5%. So that's $87,000 a year we'd normally expect to see from debt service. That's what we've achieved in this initial presentation. Library tax levy is $875,000. Again, a normal increase, since most of that is staff related and other costs would be about 2%. Be about $18,000. This year, we're seeing a $49,000 increase in the tax levy support for the library. And that's due to some additional capital requests and also some additional benefit costs as we're planning for staff transitions down there. So that's $31,000 more than we normally see. Capital projects, we usually target for about $700,000 of annual funds for capital projects. And conceptually, that's a 2% annual, I don't wanna say COLA, but inflationary pressure on that. So that would be $14,000 a year. This year, we're seeing a $192,000 increase against last year's budget. So that's $178,000 more than we would typically see in a normal annual cycle. And then lastly, just the senior resource center is a $100,000 line item. Again, about $2,000 a year would be a typical increase. This year, we're seeing an $18,000 a year increase, most notably because we used reserve funds from the senior resource center last year, so now these funds aren't available. We gotta make that difference up. So my pitch and my takeaway at the end of the discussion, $294,000, expect to see that next year. That's normal.
At least.
And this year, above and beyond that, we've got to address $375,000 in addition to that, for the reasons noted. And then, of course, there's some just individual line item variances that we go through the departmental budgets. But this is really the overview of the overview. So that's really all I need to say, and now I can go right to.
Let's start with the questions.
General questions or?
Go ahead, Ann.
Regarding this, I really like this, thank you very much. The second to the last one, can you remind me what the breakout is of the $195,000 in new village board initiatives? I know we've gone over it, but I can't remember. And
Well,
it was
we
somewhere.
haven't really gone over it.
Okay.
It's kind of summarized in.
I remember reading it somewhere.
In your draft, but in the actual budget documents, it's on page 104. Organizational review, 30,000, transportation parking study, 90,000, river trail plan, 10,000, police building completion option, 65,000. So that's really what's in the 195,000. Now, there's obviously every year, there's new initiatives spread throughout the remainder. We've got e-poll books, document management software. We always have something
Yeah.
new, but that's just the big, what we call the one-time items.
Okay, I have two sets of questions. Some are just general thoughts about the document, and then I also have some wage and salary questions. So I'll just start with general. So in here, it talks about how we did not increase any utility parking fees for off-street parking permits. I believe we did. I think we, didn't we adopt a $75, or did we just change the schedule, just the publication? I can't remember.
Technically, you're correct, but there wasn't a structural change. It was one lot that we changed. So I agree. Technically, we did make an adjustment. It's
Okay.
inconsequential budgetarily, but yes, you're right.
Okay,
I have a question about that too. Why is this now in the general fund? Wasn't that in the parking utility? Wasn't that fee in the parking utility last year?
It was when it was
The
fee for
overnight
service, but I thought the board's direction was that it's now public service and therefore it would belong in the general fund.
So that was one of your revenue thing recommendations that we talked about last meeting. that
Well,
were
it's
on that
still
list.
in the list to do that,
But I mean,
but
if we-
regardless of that decision, this is now
If we
general.
didn't separate it out from the parking utility, if we kept it all in the parking utility, then
Is the
the
numbers
loss
in
would
here?
be seen in the parking utility.
I think the answer to your question is yes. That's really not an option because the board expressed that they do not want this to be a parking, they want this to be a community service with the free lots, so it really belongs in the general fund.
Wait, are we?
Now,
talking
I've still got
something?
revenues of whatever number I've got in the memo that says I'd still like to move those into the general fund as well. But this is an administrative change based on previous board
Are
decisions.
you just talking about the $44,000
$48,000
for the single
deducting fees.
overnight fees?
Well, I'm
No, I
just,
don't think that's
okay,
what
for
she's
the,
saying.
for the 2018 budget, okay, all of our parking, any type of, if you're paying the
Mhm.
restricted area in the south, that was in the parking utility, right? If you were overnight parking, that, I mean,
Mhm.
everything was in the parking utility.
When it was fee for service, yes, that's consistent with the parking utility
But-
operation.
So
And
if,
it's still
so
that
we,
way.
so we got rid of a fee, but we could keep it all in the parking utility, and then we wouldn't have the 48,000
I
general.
I would tend to disagree, decided not to pursue a fee for service activity, therefore it's a general fund expenditure.
Did we make that decision?
No, and
Well, you just eliminated the fee to zero, right?
yeah, but changing it from, I think what trustee Mention's trying to say, or let me rephrase it and see if, is that
Please-
in the
please help.
parking utility, it wasn't the general fund, the parking utility is separate, correct? And so in that parking utility, we would collect the revenue, it stays in there, and then you pay out of that revenue, correct? For fees
Or
and.
the cost of, yes.
So is it really affecting our, since it's a utility, is it really affecting our general fund by 40, whatever thousand?
Well, the reason it's in a utility is because utility is a business model,
Mhm.
fee for service accounting for revenues and expenditures.
Mhm.
The board decided not to do fee for service for this activity anymore, therefore it's not applicable to a utility model anymore.
So you're
It's a
saying
general
expense
government-
has to then, because it's not,
Yeah,
but
Yeah.
wait, it's still an expense, I don't agree with that, it's still an expense of the parking utility, we're just not collecting revenue, it was always in there, even when we didn't collect revenue for the $2 fee. Like, okay, remember in the past budget, before
Now we
last
saw
year,
the gap.
Yeah, the revenue and the expense relating to it,
Were both
last
in
year were
utility.
in the parking utility.
That's correct.
so you're just
So,
eliminating the
so
revenue.
we eliminated a fee, but we can
didn't
still
eliminate the
keep the
expense.
expense in the parking utility.
There's
Why
a
do we
reserve.
have to move the expense to the general fund?
Because you're no longer applying a consistent principle to the principles of a parking utility, you've decided to make it a community service. Community services are therefore more properly accounted for in the general fund.
Where was it prior to us adopting in the last year's budget, 2018, the $2
I'd have to
fee?
review those items,
I
I'd be happy to do that.
I have, I think it was in the parking utility. And so.
In any case, that would still be my recommendation.
Well, can we rethink that, because it affects our
On the list?
general.
Board can do anything they'd
Right, I
like.
mean, it affects our, it's just
Put it on the
practices.
list.
Okay, so,
but then the next year, those funds won't be there. And
Mhm.
you're creating a
Deficit
growing,
model.
it's, but we keep
a
it in
structural
reserves.
deficit in utilities. If we wanna move the reserves, that might be, but.
Are we though, because we're collecting more per year, if you look at the budget, in revenue in our parking utility than we are in expenditures. So a structural deficit would mean that we would go negative. But we keep
Well,
depositing into a reserve.
he's saying that if we keep it in the utility, we're gonna have this annual $48,000 expense without a revenue offsetting.
Right, but the permits, if they cover that already, because you know how every year we have a surplus and it goes into this reserve for the parking utility?
Yeah,
Like you mentioned in the
we
last
do
meeting.
have a growing fund
We have a
balance.
growing, so if you have a surplus, that was your point when you voted no against the fee, was that as long as there's not a deficit, then we don't have a structural deficit in the parking utility.
Well, and we're also gonna be totally reconsidering parking, and I assume there will be a fee for those who are proposing that we allow overnight parking. I assume that they're thinking that there's gonna be a fee associated with that, so it is a one-time, just a one-time thing.
So I'll follow up on the history for the subsequent meeting.
Okay. Other
So,
questions?
can I,
And then we.
So I started,
I'm sorry, just so clarifying the process, Mark, so then that's on the list of the wrap-up, that it would come back if we were, if it were allowable to move it to the utility, and that matches history, then we would have the option at the wrap-up to make that
The
recommendation.
board can certainly make that direction of staff.
okay, so I, my.
Yeah, I'm not saying I support it, I just wondered
Do we just-
procedurally how it's
Well,
gonna.
really, it's been moved from the utility to the I mean, it's always
Right.
been in the utility, and now it's moved, so, but anyway. Go ahead, and then Wes has a question.
Okay, so I'll just wrap up my general questions, or do you want, do
I
you
don't
want
know
at a
how many
time?
are there.
I just like 3.
Is 3 more, or,
Nope, 2 more.
okay, go ahead.
Okay, so just sticking on general, I had mentioned to trustee Amenta today, it was confusing for me on the different charts of debt and the change in the debt service. So sometimes it says 2%, sometimes it says 5.5. They're all right, I'm not questioning the numbers. But it takes you to get to 21, and I'm just trying to establish like education, like helping the public as well, because I don't understand that they would be able to, but once you get to 21, it talks about what other financing sources are, which is really general reserves to subsidize the debt payments, debt service payments,
Correct.
right? But we call it this, and then in the other charts, we call other financing, it gets very confusing. So my question is there anywhere in this overview, if we used it for an executive summary, that says, we have a policy that says we will not, the change in debt service cannot exceed 5% of that general fund for that year, right, the revenues we collect for our general fund. And anything above that we subsidize using our general reserves. How do I find out a total of what percentage our debt service was this year? Like, I know it's 5% somewhere, and then other financing sources, you'd add that somewhere, and
Well, on
is it
page
at
7,
6?
I believe on
Okay.
page 7.
Sure.
Is your year-over-year comparisons by percentages. Is that what you're asking? It says levy limits on the top. Mine might be slightly different.
Levy limits, let me
I'm
find it on
working
mine.
with the budget now, not the,
She wants to know what the
Oh, I
debt
see.
service expense net of the general reserve transfer, like, if we
We
were
didn't do
transferring
the transfer.
reserves, what would our debt service, and I believe we wanna know just the general fund areas, general government areas net of TID. And I,
you'd have to add the 313 to
Yep,
this
I
and
get
do
it.
some math. Yeah.